Today's edition of Mac Voices is supported by Mac Voices Magazine, our free Flipboard magazine that brings you some of the best Mac, iPhone, and iPad productivity tips on the web. High in signal, low in noise, just like Mac Voices, Mac Voices Magazine includes information on how you can get more out of your Apple technology. Subscribe at macvoices.com/magazine or search for Mac Voices Magazine on Flipboard. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this time around, we're back with another Take Control author with an update to his book, Mr. Josh Centers. Josh, welcome. It's great to see you.
Hi, Chuck. Thanks for having me back again.
Hey, it's always a pleasure. And I'm kind of excited about this one, even though it's according to you, it's a relatively small update. There are a number of things I want to get into it with. We're going to talk about Take Control of Apple Home Automation. So, you and Joe Kissel both said, this is kind of a minor update, but I found a couple really interesting things. At least I think they're interesting. I wanted to ask you, what you found interesting in the update and why you felt it was even worth an update.
Well, there were a number of kind of relatively minor things that Apple updated that necessitated a book update. The hardware landscape is about the same as it was when I first wrote the book 3 or 4 years ago at this point. But Apple did make a lot of changes, and improvements in iOS 14 and the new operating systems. One of those is they have finally fleshed out the status bar or the status messages. In previous versions of the Home app, it was just like a text list. It was like, this many devices not responding, blah, blah, blah. And you can't really do anything with it. And something that I think is an improvement overall is that Apple has made that a lot more visual and interactive. So instead of just being a list of text status messages, it's a set of interactive buttons. And so, if you have, like 5 updates available for your devices, you can tap that button and see all those updates. And so I think that makes Home feel like much more of a finished app instead of just sort of something kind of slapped together. A couple interesting things have happened in the HomeKit world. One of those, now this is not a new feature. This was announced with iOS 13 and those subsequent updates, but it took a while to get rolling, and that's the HomeKit routers. And that's something I cover a bit in the book. Now, I don't have any of these routers, so I just kind of point people to the, where they need to go to find out about this stuff. But Apple created this scheme in iOS 13, so certain routers have this built-in HomeKit functionality. And what it does is it effectively walls off your HomeKit devices from the rest of your network and from the internet to create a more secure, sort of a secure air gap between your network and these HomeKit devices, which I think is really interesting. I'm not sure how practical it is for most people because you do have to get the most benefit out of it. You actually have to set up your devices again from scratch so they go through the router instead of connecting directly to everything. But it's an interesting thing. It's finally been fleshed out a bit. Another thing that has developed more, and it's not necessarily new, but the support of cameras, security cameras, has improved a great deal with iOS 14. Again, this is not new. We've discussed HomeKit Secure Video before, but when Apple first launched that feature, there weren't any cameras that supported it, and the only camera that supported it for quite a while was the Logitech Circle 2, and that required installing a special firmware update that cut off a lot of the camera features, but it did enable HomeKit Secure Video. And that's also a very expensive camera. I haven't checked the prices lately, but it goes for, $150, $200 something dollars. And you get these cameras, you want a lot of them, right? So that's something that gets expensive very quickly. And Eufy actually now makes very affordable HomeKit security cameras that use HomeKit Secure Video. And they go for right now. There's a sale on them. I think you can get one of the basic ones for about $30. Usually they go for around 40 or 50. But in any case, it's a lot more reasonable than the Logitech cameras. So those are kind of the main things, at least to me, that I found the most interesting with HomeKit.
So I want to take on those each one just a little bit.
Hmm.
The HomeKit routers. Now, you said that you don't have any, so I understand that there's only so much you can talk about with them. But is this? I like what I'm hearing because it sounds like that all my HomeKit devices would be on what pre-HomeKit router you might say is just a completely separate network.
Hmm.
So the question then I have is the oh boy, I'm not sure how I say this. Does that mean that maybe I have to have my Mac on that HomeKit router or my iPhone on that HomeKit router to accept commands, or can I be on my normal? Well, is it a separate network? Maybe that's the best way to say it, or is it all internal and seamless?
At least in theory, it's supposed to be internal and seamless. Of course, this is one of those things I don't have direct experience with, unfortunately. I thought about buying an Eero router. Eero right now is the only one that supports it uh, currently. The Linksys VLOP routers are set to support it, but they haven't quite implemented it yet. But yeah, in theory, it's supposed to be all seamless, and it partitions all those devices from the rest of your network. At least that's in theory. And the unfortunate thing, I've actually heard a lot of even user experiences from that because I don't think it's something a lot of people take advantage of. Because first of all, you have to have the special router, and the Eero routers aren't exactly cheap, and you also you have to have HomeKit, and I'm fully aware that HomeKit is a niche thing, and then you have to go through and set everything up again, which is a total pain in the butt. When I talk about this in the book. When I moved a couple of years ago, I actually ended up setting everything up from scratch, and it was a total headache that I actually don't recommend. I actually recommend if you're going to move, just keep the home set up the same way, and just because it's not going to know the difference, So and then just set up your stuff around the house. You don't have to remove it and set it up again. I actually advise against that. So I don't have just a ton of experience. In theory, it's supposed to be seamless, So hopefully, if you try that, it is.
I have to admit, I'm a little surprised to hear you say that, only because I know you.
Yeah.
And I would think you'd be one of the first guys to say, I want everything as secure as possible. And as sort of a segue into the next part of the conversation, the HomeKit video or the HomeKit cameras,
Hmm.
I personally would feel a lot more secure with a HomeKit camera than probably with a lot of other cameras, and especially with like the Amazon shows, because I have an Amazon show and I have not only the little slide over it, but I also have a piece of tape over so it can't get accidentally moved. Um, if you put cameras in your home, it's one thing to have a security camera maybe outside your house, because then your neighbors have to worry about what you're seeing. But if
Hmm.
you're inside my house, you can see pretty much anything I'm doing in that room within range of the camera. And so I personally would feel a lot better about a HomeKit camera than any others.
Yeah, so the reason I don't have an Eero, there's a few reasons. One of those is I lease a router from my ISP, which in the past I used to recommend against, but I get a really good deal through my ISP. I give them $3 a month, and I have like an industrial grade router. It looks like a PlayStation 2. It's this enormous slotted, weird looking thing, and it gives me, I live on a farm. It gives me Wi-Fi coverage, you know, for a pretty great distance. Like I can be out in the woods and still have Wi-Fi. So I haven't found, Eero is really good for if you have a large house and you need to spread Wi-Fi through the whole house, and because you have the issue of things in the wall getting in the way, blocking the signal. Like if you have metal in the wall, that's a really common problem. And so Eero isn't just a great solution for my needs. I don't have a problem with Wi-Fi signals inside the house. I want to have Wi-Fi as far away from the house as possible because I don't have cell service. The other thing, from the security standpoint, I don't trust Eero because Amazon owns them, and I don't trust any Amazon hardware. I don't. One thing, I have the Ecobee thermostat, great thermostat, but it's got Alexa built in, which I don't like at all. And once you set it up, you can't unset it up, as far as I can tell. So I'll leave the microphone turned off. But we've had some Alexa devices and things like that, and I've just unplugged them. Maybe it's paranoid. I just don't really trust Amazon with that stuff. I think a lot of stuff Amazon does is creepy, like the whole like Amazon key thing, where you let strangers in your house, based on a code, or they want to give police information from your Ring cameras they're set up, and I don't know, their security practices make me leery, and so that's why I don't have an Eero. I considered buying one just for testing purposes, but and this is sort of the one of the tricky things with this home automation book has always been, this stuff is expensive, and I can't cover every piece of hardware. We had a partnership with Eve for the first edition of the book, and maybe we still do. I don't know. I don't track all the business stuff, but they sent me a whole bunch of home automation stuff I could play with, and I actually spent a lot of my own money buying stuff, even before the book. So I write about what I have experience with, but it's impossible to test every single home automation device and tell people about it, unfortunately. Now it comes to the routers, I could have covered Eero in depth in the book, but then I also thought, okay, so when Linksys comes out with the VLOP stuff, then would I need to cover that? And then let's say over the course of the year, HomeKit router support expands greatly, and then them in the quagmire of there'd be an expectation to cover every single router setup, which that would probably be its own book, and it would just be maddening. So one of the tricky things, you always have to figure out where to draw the line on stuff, and I don't always necessarily like where I have to draw those lines, and sometimes my readers don't either. But that's just one of the challenges when you deal with a book like this. I think we give a pretty broad coverage of everything, especially the basics and things like that, and the stuff people are most likely to have in their homes. But so that's just sort of the calculus that went into that. And if you want to talk about the cameras, so the camera thing is interesting. I only have one HomeKit secure video camera so far, and that's a Eufy. I forget the exact name. It's like a 360 camera with like the motorized lens. And here's one of the things. I don't recommend that camera because for HomeKit secure video, because the HomeKit cannot control the motor. So you have to go in the Eufy app to do that. And here's another interesting thing too. We recently worked with Glenn Fleischman. He does the security cameras book, and he recently wrote an article for Tidbits about HomeKit Secure Video. It's a great article. You should go to tidbits.com and read it. But he wasn't aware. So he's only familiar with the Logitech Circle cameras, right? And so for those, you still have to flash a special firmware. With a Eufy camera, there is not a special firmware. You actually have to set it up through the Eufy app, because one of the things you wrote about in the book is like in the article, is one of the advantages of HomeKit Secure Video is the vendor can't see what's in your camera. But in the case of the Eufy camera, I'm guessing there is a path where they could see what's on the camera, even with HomeKit Secure Video. I'm not entirely sure how that works. It's still kind of fuzzy, but there isn't a special firmware. You can view everything. You can record it in the Eufy camera if you want to, or you can do it through HomeKit. So I do think it has some security advantages. I think it does overall have a lot of great usability things that we can talk about in a minute, but I'm a little skeptical about the security angle. And really, and here's the thing with the security cameras, I only set them up for for 2 times, either for testing or for when I go on vacation. And the reason for that is my wife will go around the house and unplug every single camera I set up. And so it's like, there's no conversation. She just unplugs them and asks her like, hey, what happened to this camera? I don't know. And so, I don't blame her, because it makes me kind of nervous too. So one time I got one of those PlayStation cameras that you hook up to a PlayStation is on the TV, and she walked in the house like, why is there a camera on the TV? Unplug that. So, and I don't blame her. I have the same misgivings. So there's something like things like cameras I typically just set up to test. And then they mostly stay unplugged, and it's one of the things I talk about in the book. You have to figure out what your comfort level is with things. You might be comfortable having automated lights. Maybe you don't want, internet connected cameras in your house. And I completely understand that sort of thing. And, it's one of those things you have to make your own decisions on.
Are you getting everything you can from Mac Voices? Mac Voices magazine on Flipboard delivers the best articles from the web on how to do more with your Apple gear. From quick tips to more in-depth articles, Mac Voices magazine is updated daily with what's new and useful, skipping the news and hype to provide you with actionable information. You can always use the web link, but the Flipboard app delivers a superior viewing experience. Flipboard for iPhone and iPad are both free in the App Store, and Mac Voices magazine is free in Flipboard and on the web. Or check out macvoices.com/magazine. Interesting point about the Eero, because I'm running Eero routers here.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest with you, I kind of forgot about the fact that Amazon bought them. So, my comfort level is still good because I feel good about everything I know about Eero. But, you're right. Sometimes you got to take that second or third step back and decide what is for you. The video, I'm with you. The only thing I can say to your wife is it might be a whole lot easier if you just take a little piece of cloth or something and put it over the camera. That way, if you want to use the camera, you can just pull the cloth off instead of having to plug it back in and hope it comes back up in the system. Because I have started doing that with a couple of the cameras around here. I know that you're not supposed to worry about it, but I still do. I have the little sliders on all my Mac cameras. And for any camera that, as long as it's plugged into a power source, I usually throw something over top of it, especially if it's in an area where, it might see something that you would prefer it not to see. So, I'm like you, maybe cause both paranoid, but
I think it's a good practice in general to assume that if you have a camera pointed at you, that somebody might be able to see what you're doing. I'm sure Jeffrey Toobin would agree with that assessment. I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but
well, go ahead for the listeners. I'll let you tell it.
How do I phrase this in a family-friendly way? He was on, so he's a higher up guy at the New Yorker, and he was on a business call. It was actually like an election war game with a lot of the other higher ups at the New Yorker. Of course, the New Yorker is very prestigious and hoity-toity and all that. And anyway, they had a brief break to do some game planning. Well, apparently he was doing some different game planning of his own, because when they came back, he was how do I say this? He was enjoying himself on the camera and didn't realize it. And he's currently I don't know if they just suspended him or what, but he's I'm going to tell you, if that was me, well, first of all, don't do that sort of stuff on a business call regardless. But if that were me, like, you wouldn't have to worry about firing me. I would just go crawl into a cave and no one would ever see me again. But, the lesson there is to always be wary of, having, a camera pointing at you. If you do personal stuff in front of your computer that you don't want other people to see, then you probably want to make sure the camera is covered and away from you. If nothing else, it's it's like gun safety, right? Like, and not to get too far into that, but hardcore gun people have all these rules for don't point at anybody, keep your finger off the trigger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And and you have all those safeguards, because humans make mistakes, and I think everyone's had some kind of instant where you did something stupid, even though you knew better, just, in the heat of the moment. So, I would treat a camera much like I would a gun, in that, you should have multiple safeguards to prevent yourself from having one of those embarrassing situations. For instance, right now, I'm wearing pants. You don't need to know that because, you can't see that. But, nevertheless, I wouldn't do a camera interview pantsless, because, I might stand up and then, oops, you might see something you don't want to see. And so you want to have, when it comes to dangerous things, I would consider cameras like this a potentially dangerous thing. You want to have multiple safeguards. And so I think a little bit of paranoia isn't a bad thing.
Josh, you're the first person I've ever heard compare the camera to a gun from a safety standpoint, and I couldn't agree more. It's brilliant, because you're right. 9 times out of 10, the safety's on the gun. You're not going to have a problem. But that one time that it's not, and the trigger gets pulled accidentally, or there's a round in the chamber that you didn't expect. You can't take it back. And so Folks, if you take nothing else away from this interview, take that away. That is just phenomenal advice. And I have to admit, I'm going to rethink even a couple of mine. And I tend to think I'm conservative in how I view the cameras in my house. But yeah, that's going to make me change my tune a little bit. Interesting.
Yeah, and of course, there's also times when a camera, there's a balance. A camera can, it's just like a gun. Again, there's times when having those cameras can be beneficial, and times when they can be dangerous. For instance, if you have a problem with people stealing packages off your front door, well, having a camera pointing at your front door would probably be a good thing, especially if you made it really obvious. I have this issue. I do live in the sticks in Tennessee. And when we moved to this land, I wrote about this at the Prepared, not to get too far into that, but when you live in the country, people like to test you. It's just one of those things. Like I had a guy ride up on a side-by-side drunk off, his hindquarters, showing me the gun he carried around with him. And so I had to pull mine out and show him mine. And then, it was like everything was cool. But, we have a problem, this being a rural area. We have a bad meth problem here. We have a bad drug problem here. And there's a lot of that activity. And so we would come home or just go outside to find the strangest things, like people just taking stuff out of my yard and acting like just absolutely bumfuzzled when I called them out on it. People, just hanging out in my yard, asking me if I pull my dog off of them. I'm like, no, I'm gonna give my dog a treat because why are you in my yard? One time we came home after being out that night, and there was a naked lady running through our yard. Now, mind you, we don't live in the middle of a city. We live on a very rough, borderline dirt road. It's not the kind of place people just do that. It's like, oh well. So we had a lot of very strange activity. We actually had a dog go missing. We think the dog got stolen. And so I set up hunting cameras outside my house. And if you're not familiar with these, they're little self-contained units. Some of them have network connectivity, but I'm too cheap for that. I get the ones that just have the SD card, and they can see in the dark. And the idea is you put them out in the woods and see if you have deer out there. It's really meant for hunters. But I put some in my yard. I put some out in the woods. I just put them up everywhere just to see what I get. And I was looking through the footage one day. This dude walked straight up to my yard and was staring straight into the camera. I couldn't have been 5 feet away from the camera, just going oh my God, they got a camera. So, the camera can be a great deterrent. And I'll tell you, after I put up that camera and I got a much larger dog, I didn't have those problems anymore. Now, hopefully most people watching this don't have those sort of crazy situations, but things being the way they are, you might. And so that's a consideration. So, camera in the house, do consider the privacy angle, do consider the potential blackmail or embarrassment angle, but also consider the fact that an outdoor camera can be a great deterrent, because a lot of times when people realize that you're onto them and they're being watched, and most criminals aren't very bright, and most of them go after targets of opportunity. And so if you present yourself as someone who isn't going to be toyed with, then I feel like you oftentimes can make yourself safer. So that's one of the considerations with cameras as well.
Josh, I think you should. I disagree. I think you should probably invest in a couple of those network connected cameras, set them up, and pay for access to them, because it sounds like there's a lot of entertainment going on at your place.
Well, not as much now. Not as much now. I think I drove the point home.
Yeah. The next edition of Mac Voices will feature the rest of our conversation with Josh Centers about the update to take control of Apple Home Automation. Josh talks about the updates to the Apple HomeKit app and what you can do with it and why he prefers it. And we wrap up a number of other things in general relating to Apple Home Automation. That's next time on Mac Voices. Until then, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. you will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.